Welcome everybody to the webinar on choosing the right lone worker device for your organisation. My name's Matt. I'll be your MC for the presentation. On the call presenting, we've got Mark Sadler, our New Zealand Southern Region Business Development Manager, who'll be presenting today. I ask that everyone places themselves on mute for the duration of the presentation. We should take approximately 20 to 25 minutes to go through the content. And if you've got any questions following that, we'll be able to field them for you via email or message. So just shoot us a message when you receive anything along those lines. Without further ado, over to you, Mark, to get started.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks, Matt, and also thank you, Omar, for organising the webinar, and thank you for everyone who's listening now or attending. As Matt said, in terms of question and answer session, what we've decided to do in order of saving time and also to help you out, if you could just send your questions to info@smartrak.com, either during or afterwards, and we can run through those one-on-one at any time. So hopefully the steps that I have are pretty clear anyway and self-explanatory, but more than happy to go in more detail if and when needed. So as Matt said, my name is Mark Sadler. I'm the South Island Business Development Manager for Smartrak. I'm based in Christchurch myself, and my office is all around the South Island. So a huge part of my role is travelling around the country, working closely with our customers, exploring their needs, learning what new challenges they face in terms of staff management, especially health and safety, which has put me in quite a unique position of being exposed to so many different scenarios across various industries, as well as geographical locations, which each obviously pose different challenges. So being able to identify those potential hazards and then mitigate them is starting to become second nature for myself. First of all, I just want to give you all a brief rundown on what I'd like to cover off today. So the evolution of personal safety devices from Smartrak's point of view, the reasons behind this webinar, and just cover that off with all of you. I'll also mention a number of devices that Smartrak offers, but if you're wanting more detail on that as well, you can just jump on smartrak.com and we have all the devices there, rather than going into them. Right, now as some of you may know, Smartrak is a telematics company. We've been around for about 12 years now, starting with the basic in-vehicle tracking, and then we quickly saw that relationship between health and safety and how that pops in day-to-day management of those vehicles. So due to that, and obviously customer requirements, we began to incorporate safety measures, both in the vehicle, such as emergency buttons and man down via radio, but all still attached to your car. So from that, a natural progression was to break free from that car for workers who leave their vehicles, but still need to be able to say signal for help if you go beyond the limitation of the vehicle-based system. So that's when, for us, the standalone devices became our next step, all retaining that richness of our maps, but extending your health and safety reach from the time the staff member gets in their vehicle, travels to their destination, leaves the vehicle, is out in the field, and then returns to base, giving you that full coverage needed from start to finish. Right, so over the years we've actually added and integrated more and more devices, both cell phone and satellite, based really on customer feedback and input, and that's to cover as many varied scenarios as possible. And it's those scenarios that I hope to touch on today. So for me, being out in the field and speaking to a large number of you, a large number of varied organisations, what I'm actually seeing is so many different scenarios where staff are potentially at risk. And the question I get asked most often is, how do we know what type of device is needed for our staff? And that's when I step in to help work through those details. And as this was coming up more and more often, that's where I decided to put together a brief document to help figure out which device was best for what type of worker. And through doing that, I came up with a fairly easy process for any company to quickly identify their employees' risk factor internally and check it against their own needs. So this is what I want to help work through with you all today. Not which Smartrak device specifically, but to establish what questions you'll need to ask your own leadership teams, your staff out in the field, to help get more of a feel for your own minimum needs, the risk profiles and communication requirements in the event of a field emergency. Right, so we'll just go on to the next slide there. Considerations and what to consider. So what I've found are the most common requirements in a lone worker device are the following. So one, people want a quick and simple procedure for lone workers to check in from the field. Number two, a way to maintain regular contact with those lone workers while minimizing interruption to their productivity. And number three, to provide staff with a means to signal for help in the event of emergency, no matter where they are, even when they're outside radio or mobile coverage. So the most crucial step before implementing any new lone worker solution and choosing that right device is to decide what your minimum user requirements are. This is before you can match them with any device or devices. So I say devices as you quickly learn, not one device will suit all. There's not one that's best for all solutions or will solve all your problems. You may need a simple solution for one member of staff, and there may be something else that requires far more detail or more features involved in that. So to do that and to decide and understand that, there are three critical questions that I believe you need to ask. Right, number one, what type of lone workers do you have? So we've come up with a very simple and high-level way to categorize the types of lone workers you have within your organization. This will help give you a base to start with when it comes to knowing what your minimum needs will be. I'll cover off the three types of users in the following slides. Number two, satellite versus cellular. So once you know what type of lone workers you have, you can then answer the question of satellite versus cellular. So this may be simple questions, maybe a simple question, but it's also crucial to making sure that you've covered off all your needs. Satellite may not be the most ideal option in terms of price, but certainly covering that risk far outweighs the cost in the long term. And number three, minimum requirements. So once you know the type of lone workers you have, what coverage they need, it will come down to what your minimum requirements are and what you're trying to achieve. Right. So what I'll do is I'll jump into the first user profile that we've created. So we've labeled this the office workers. So office, it doesn't mean specifically an office, but anyone who is within a fixed location for a period of time where cell phone coverage is typically available all the time. Office workers may not be considered lone workers by definition, but in a lot of circumstances, they'll also run the risk of danger or may have the need to discreetly signal for help in the event of emergency, or when the cell phone may potentially escalate that situation if it's brought out or is simply not available. So common users I would define as office would be, say, just frontline staff in a high-risk environment, health nurses, people walking to their car at night, lone retail staff, shift workers, caregivers, petrol station attendants, etc. Next is urban workers. So they may be based in an office 90% of the time, but are also commonly out in the field. So still within cell phone coverage is another key thing, minimum 2G, but may need to signal for help in the event of emergency or may enter an area of potential risk unsupervised during their working day or night. So most common are the likes of, say, parking wardens, tow truck drivers, animal or pest control, tradesmen, linesmen, maintenance, telco installers, carers or in-home nurses perhaps. And next, rural workers. So this is probably it's a broad category, but we've tried to drill down and define it by a couple of key points. So it's anyone who works in a remote location outside cell tower signal some or all of their day on a regular basis. So that's the key. at some stage during the day, on a regular basis, they will exit cell phone coverage. So you might be considered an urban worker 90% of your normal working week, but 10% of your time you're required to enter a remote location where cell phone coverage is not guaranteed. In that case, you would classify that staff member as rural, and they would need to have access to a rural device. So this is, again, linesmen, animal control, 3 water workers, land surveyors, long-haul drivers, tanker drivers, transport drivers, etc. as well. Right. So those are the 3 categories we feel you can comfortably put all of your staff under to begin with, and that's to work out their safety needs. Then, once you've got that defined, we'd move on to the question of satellite versus cellular. So as mentioned earlier, the reality is for a device that's hopefully never needed, cost is often a consideration when it comes to choosing a satellite device over a cellular device. And that price can vary all depending on the type of device you have, from the spot tracker to the feature-rich Shout 3G. All depends on what factors and features that you require can influence that price. However, if it's needed, it certainly outweighs the cost. So making sure you as a company are both covering your staff's minimum needs by choosing that right device for the right user, as well as not sacrificing the well-being of your staff or leaving anyone open to preventable risk is essential. So this is why it's critical to know the number of potential devices you may need rather than under or overcommitting. So now, as I said, as you know the category of users, either being office, urban or rural, you can simply take that list and decide on the minimum coverage needed. So you've already considered that in the last exercise when you classified this. So now it's just a case of confirming their needs by using the following guidelines. The users you have classified as office and urban workers should fall easily under cellular coverage. So it would only require a cellular-based device, such as the TrackSafe Mini, Personal Locator, or the full-spec Protector Pro. Users in these areas are never in a remote enough location to be out of coverage, so you can feel fairly confident with them having a cell phone-based device only. If one of those workers does, however, from time to time, but not on a regular basis, travel outside the area of coverage, then it may be a need for a satellite pool device to be available. So you would book that in and out, and that device could become a rural pool device, which can be shared throughout the office or location. Then rural workers. Again, the definition we've given them is anyone who works in a remote location outside cell tower coverage some or all of their day on a regular basis. That's the key. So safety is a concern, so they should use satellite tracking device such as, say, Spot Tracker, InReach or Shout with Smartrak. Now, all that considered, you should be able to easily match your office and urban workers together and rural to give you that total number of staff that require access to a cellular or satellite device. Again, you may not need one device for every person, but you should have coverage for all of those at least considered. Right. Next, how do we signal in case of emergency? So once you know the type of workers you have, what coverage you need, you then will need to decide on what are the minimum feature requirements needed from each device. The address button to signal for help in the event of emergency, for example, is the bare minimum all Smartrak devices, all health and safety devices should and will offer. If that's all you require, then you can match the device against the location requirements, cellular or satellite, and you'll have your pick of devices. Basically, they'll all meet your needs if that's your minimum requirement. However, I would suggest to ensure you cover all your needs, you should also ask the following 2 critical questions. Is your lone worker at risk of being unconscious? If so, what do we do if our lone worker is unconscious? Or how can I check with my lone worker in the field? Or how can I check in with my lone worker in the field? So to answer these questions, we just need to look at the types of alerts available. Right. So types of alerts. You'll need to think what risks your staff may face and how you want the emergency to be communicated. Yes, it can be as simple as pushing the button, but there may be times your staff cannot trigger an alert themselves. So you may want a device initiated alert, man down as it's called, to be triggered in that event. So I've just listed a few of the most common types of alerts available. So inactivity is one. So they're not conscious or unable to reach the device within a set period. This is good for anyone who's at risk of being knocked unconscious or has the potential to be unable to trigger an alert themselves in the event of emergency. So the device will automatically send an alarm if the wearer has not moved for a set period of time. Often you can adjust that period of time, which whatever will suit the role most, but it will automatically trigger that alarm in that event. A tilt switch. So if the wearer falls down, an alert will trigger, or is not in their normal upright or sideways position, an alert will trigger. It's mainly used by linesmen or a worker where the risk of being shocked or knocked down is possible, or anyone who this could happen. And then a check-in feature. So a countdown timer that generates an alert when the time expires. The wearer needs to push a button to acknowledge they are safe every X amount of minutes, so it could be 60 minutes, and then it will trigger an alert if that alarm is not, or that button is not pushed. So this is more location specific. It's a handy feature for anyone who's in a high risk location where the wearer needs to actively acknowledge their safety. So they're in a high risk location, they don't respond within a set period of time, that alarm will be triggered. Right, the next question I want to cover off, bring you back to is, how can I check in with my lone worker in the field? So we have several different communication types. As you'll see there, one-way voice, two-way voice, and messaging. So just to run through these options. One-way voice. So this is in an emergency. It is possible for the first responder, so that person you've designated to be the first response, to then dial into that device, listen to the surrounding activities, hear what's happening, and then assess the danger or risk. So just to note, often you can limit who can dial into that device, so it's not just open to anyone. It can be either a specific number can dial in there, and that's just for if privacy concerns are raised. And then the next voice option is two-way voice. So just like a cell phone, it's possible to dial into the device and have a two-way conversation if required. So in terms of the Protector Pro, when you dial into that device, you can also have automatic answer. So if someone is unable to physically answer the device, it will then switch on the microphone and people will be able to have that two-way conversation back and forward and discuss what situation is happening. The call itself cannot be initiated from the device usually. It's only to the device. And it's also often feature only based of cellular devices as well. There may be satellite options available. Next, messaging. So text-based messaging. Some devices can message back to the live maps, or you can message from the maps to the device. This can be a handy tool to establish with your staff the status of any alert once triggered, or to check in and out when on site. Right. Now, another key fact that people often forget, but it's quite essential when it comes to staff out in the field, is you need to establish what sort of environment your key staff will be working in. So you need to, so will they be outdoors in the rain, dirt, what elements will they be exposed to? Are they exposed to a lot of dirt, sawdust, sand? Will they be crossing rivers or lakes? Are they driving a fuel tanker where static is a potential risk? You need to take all of those things into consideration and then match them with the minimum specs against your device. So obviously, you won't know where your staff will be at all times, but you should have a fairly good idea depending on the role, or you can even put that to them. And then it's basically how you decide, do I need a waterproof device? Do I need a dust-proof device? Does it have to be intrinsically safe? All those options should be available to you, and it just makes sure that when your wearer is out in the field, the environment's not going to cause an effect on their safety. Right. Next, just going to run through the 3 user types again, office, urban and rural, and just give you some examples of common features needed for each user and how that may be used, how that may be used in your role and what feature, etc., and what's common. So office workers, so manual duress. This is the most direct, basic, as I've mentioned before. You push a button to discreetly call for help. This could be a reception role, security position, any role where there may be a confrontational situation and you don't want to, well, you want to alert your first responder, but you don't necessarily want to alert who you're speaking to that a signal has been sent. Inactivity alert, so a staff member who works in an overnight shift who could potentially lose consciousness. No one will be aware until the morning, such as a carer, nurse, many different roles, and one-way voice. So again, this is another quite common one within the office environment. So this just gives that staff member the peace of mind that in an emergency, that first responder can jump in, listen and assess the situation, and then send the appropriate response. So again, appropriate responses, it could be a physical confrontation, it could be someone who's had an accident or injury and is unable to send that alert out. Urban workers, so what features does a standard urban worker user often need? First of all, manual duress, again, it's another one that comes up. Basic alert, tilt detection, so device activated, perfect for electricians or tradesmen, waterproof, dustproof. Again, this is a must to consider for any role that's exposed to the elements. Again, electrician, field technician, installer, someone who may be crawling under houses. It could be trapped or in an emergency. Inactivity detection, again, that's another one. If an electrician or someone is crawling under a location, for some reason is knocked unconscious, you'll want to have that alert sent out. Intrinsically safe, two-way voice, and a countdown timer. And rural workers. So obviously, again, you could have your pick and choice of different scenarios, different requirements. However, the most common we get, again, manual duress, that tilt detection, waterproof and dustproof is probably the biggest one for a lot of rural workers, as well as that need for satellite. Inactivity detection, being intrinsically safe, and then geofence alerts. Now, geofence alerts generally are simply a feature of a device, a feature of the mapping. For us, for Smartrak, you can have unlimited geofences on your maps, and there are a number of different alerts that can relate to that. You can have alert on enter or exit of a certain location, and that can send that, whether it's a text or an email, or just reporting to the field. Right, next I just want to go through standard device checklist. So this is the Smartrak one, and I won't go into the specifics, but I just want to explain how this one works. So in this case, you'll see on the left, we've got the device, in the middle, emergency, and on the far end, the communication. So, and as you drop down the list, you'll see more and more features are available. So it's a simple matrix, basically designed to show you how to align all the points that we've discussed against the device that you're looking at. We have mobile network, satellite network, and then down the bottom, we have obviously radio frequency. So that's your in-vehicle device. It's also available. So I'll just leave that there for 30 seconds if you want to have a wee look, as it's quite key to really help you pick that device, match everything that we've gone through against which type of device that you're looking for, and align that with your users' needs out in the field. So you can take this further. So for example, where you have communicates on the mobile network, that would be typically your office and urban workers, and then communicates via satellite, again exclusively, that's where you would pick for your rural workers as well. So if you have any questions on any of these, and like I said, on our website, if you go to smartrak.com, you'll be able to see any of these specific devices. We're more than happy to answer any of your questions as well on that one. Right. So basically as a takeaway, as there are so many different solutions needed for different types of loan workers, knowing your staff's minimum requirements are the most critical factor. Some common processes for choosing the right solution for your staff are basically, to sum up everything we've talked about, if you ask the following 5 questions, you should be well on your way to knowing your requirements. So even if you don't use anything that we've gone through, these are the 5 questions that I sort of feel are essential when deciding internally, you know, how many staff will require this, what staff's needs, what are their minimum requirements. So first of all, what type of loan workers do you have? Office, urban or rural? What coverage do they need? Satellite or cellular? What are the minimum requirements each user needs in case of emergency? How do you want to communicate your alerts with your staff? And what environments will they be working in? So all those factors considered, you'll know the crucial questions you need to ask within your business, and that will help you make more of an informed decision around choosing those personal safety devices. Once you've considered all the above factors, our next recommendation is to establish a firm plan of action following an alert triggered. So that's quite critical. So how do you want that monitored? Do you want that monitored internally? Do you want that a third party to monitor it? Often that's a good scenario if you want someone else to at least be that first responder. Rather than having your senior management team receive a text alert at 2 in the morning, they can still receive that alert, but you might have a third party who, hey, we know that this is what they'll do, this is how they'll respond. We're all kept in the loop, but we know that staff member will be looked after. So that's the action plan that I would suggest you putting in place. So these are all things that Smartrak, myself, definitely is more than happy to discuss with you further and go in more detail. It's something that I deal with every day. People are always asking me questions about this, so I'm more than happy to help you out and give you some answers if you need. And next, as I mentioned before, please do send us an email if you have any questions at all, anything you would like to go through, anything you want clarity around. In this case, it's probably good, even if you have a scenario, you're not quite sure, you don't know how a staff member or what they'll need or which category they go under, just let us know, flick us an email, and we're more than happy to run through those scenarios with you and just at least help. Right, thank you. Thank you everyone for getting involved. Thank you for listening and taking your time out. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark, and great presentation. Hopefully everyone's taken a few things away from that around some of the considerations in selecting a device, because there is a lot of background before you're actually arriving at a final destination with the devices that are suitable for your staff. So we'll end this webinar here, and thank you, Mark. We will be running another one in another 2 weeks, so we'll look forward to having everyone join us for that one as well. Thank you very much.